What's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with Scoop Duck on 3, coming to you on Saturday, March 14th, 2026. Lots going on in the Oregon football world right now. We have spring practice resuming in Eugene. I know a lot of folks are excited about that, which also means recruits are taking visits once again. You know, we always have you covered on every aspect of that over on scoopduck.com. But we also have the NFL draft coming up in not too long. And the Ducks certainly had a showing out there at the NFL draft combine in Indianapolis. So joining me to break it down today is host of the Ruffino and Joe show and a draft analyst at AtoZ Sports, my good friend, Joe DeLeone. How's it going, Joe? Thanks for being here.
It's going great. We're like in the perfect window. I feel like leading up to the draft, to get spring ball happening, and this ramp up to the excitement is just starting to build. So I'm always excited when March comes around because I feel like there's just so much that can happen, so much can change, and I'm of course excited to dig into these Oregon guys.
No doubt. Well, we are super excited to have you on the show here. I think one thing that I really enjoy is getting to talk about I guess all three phases really with football. Like I get to get these guys on the show or talk about them on my radar as high school guys, and then uh, see them at Oregon, and then now obviously they're going to be taking their next step in their careers here with the NFL draft, not too far away. So maybe we just start here, Joe. I know you do a ton of draft stuff, a ton of college football stuff, and you do a tremendous job. But let's just talk about kind of what the perception is of Oregon with regard to producing NFL talent, because as someone who's covered this program since 2018, it very much feels like this is a new age type of program, but there are some dudes that are coming out of Oregon.
Yeah, I feel like, and I think that we had a very similar conversation the last time I was on at the very beginning of the season. It definitely feels like there's a different caliber of prospect coming out of Oregon these days. And it's not to say that there weren't really good players coming out of Eugene. It's just evolved into premier five-star players that are getting coached really highly at a very, very effectively. And that's translating to them being highly regarded at the tops of their positions. I think that even if they aren't these premier recruits, they're also going and grabbing players like Dillon Thieneman, who was one of the top targets in the transfer portal last year, maximizing their talents and then shipping them off to the league. Bo Nix, another simple, easy example of that, where he was a raw player, underperforming at Auburn. He gets coached up, he improves, he takes the leap. I feel like every time I watch an Oregon player, and it's not going to be the case for every single prospect this year because Isaiah World, for example, which we'll end up talking about, didn't take the leap that we were hoping for. But I feel like every single time I talk about an Oregon player and I watch an Oregon player, I come away impressed with how refined they are. And the thing that last part with this that we need to start expecting is that many of these players are leaving with a lot of experience. That was one aspect of their progression as a program that's going to set them up for potentially winning a national title in 2026 that affected this year's draft cycle that is improving the quality of player that they're putting out to the league is guys are returning to stick around and to get more development. Dante Moore and Amari Washington are really good examples of that. They could have declared and been at the top of this class. Amari Washington, before he decided to go back, was one of my highest graded defensive tackles. Actually, he was my highest graded defensive tackle, if I do recall correctly. But he decided to go back, and now he has a chance to push himself maybe into the top 10 discussion. Dante Moore would have been a top 2 pick, but would that have been best for his future? He ends up deciding to go back, and he's going to be much better off in the long term because he's going to be more refined. There's going to be less of a debate on if he's proven and ready to go. So it all kind of comes down to them entering into a completely different tier where guys are coached up, guys have talent, and guys are very, very prepared to enter the NFL at a very high level.
And I like your use of the word refinement there, Joe, because I think that there's this perception, at least outside of the Oregon circle, that is that Oregon gets these guys from the portal, they're already made products. Like what they're doing in Eugene isn't that all that special because someone comes to Oregon like a Dillon Thieneman, for example, and like they're already really good. But I think that misses the point of it all because sure, there's guys that come that are really good, but they're getting even better under this coaching staff. And I think that there's just this little, I don't know, delineation. There's kind of tiers when it comes to it. Someone can come to Oregon as already being a star player, or we've seen Oregon kind of become like a second chance. Like they
Mm.
come to Oregon that things haven't necessarily been going all that well in their career. Bo Nix, obviously, like you mentioned, a great example, just completely resurrected. It felt like his football career when he came out to Eugene. So I think that that's something that is, I feel like I read a lot on social media is that, Oregon's not doing anything that special because these guys are already good, but part of that could be true while there's still more to it.
Right. And like Thieneman's like a really good example of this, where if we dig into Thieneman, he was a freshman who performed at a very high level at Purdue, 3-star kid who exploded. The guy I was really impressed with. I caught him at the very beginning of his season at Purdue, and I was like, wow, this kid has talent. As more people got caught up with who he was, many people were saying this player is going to be one of the best safeties in the country. He'll end up being a top draft pick. Second season at Purdue, and it was just disastrous. Not for him specifically, but for the entire team. And there were some other guys that, along with him, left that Purdue program to go elsewhere, and then didn't take those same leaps. Max Clare, one of his tight end teammates, he left and kind of stagnated. Still going to be a top player in this upcoming draft, but he stagnated to a degree. Nick Scourton showed improvement, but he stagnated. Didn't live up to that first round potential that everybody thought that he could have. But Thieneman makes the leap. He goes to Oregon, and he even talked about it. I was standing at his podium at the combine, and he was one of those guys. There's always one guy every single year, I think, when you go listen to these podiums, and you're just like, wow, this kid gets it. And he talked about how he left Purdue in order to get better coaching, to get more refined. He talked about being a better tackler. And I thought on film this year, he was a better tackler, and he had the athleticism that backed it, to the point now where I think it's plausible that he goes well within the top 15 picks, because he's just a really, really well-rounded player in a class that is pretty down. So Thieneman is, I think, the perfect example to fit that descriptor of refinement.
And the defensive backs that have been coming out of Oregon have really just been trending in a great direction. You look at Christian Gonzalez, who transferred over to Oregon from Colorado
Yep.
following then cornerbacks coach Demetrius Martin from Boulder to Eugene. And Thieneman, while he took much the same path, I feel like maybe didn't have as strong of a season as Gonzalez did. He was just an absolute shutdown guy. But I think he really came on really strong in the second half of the season and then just blew people away in Indianapolis. We're watching some of his 40-yard dash here on the Scoop Duck on through YouTube channel, and folks are watching this there. I mean, 4.3 was way faster than I was expecting. I mean, I knew he was a good
Yeah.
athlete, had some good ball skills, was kind of a guy with a knack for being in the right place at the right time. But Thieneman was one of just many players from Oregon. Kenyon Sadiq, I think the other one that's most notable that was just showing folks the caliber of athlete that is in Eugene on a regular basis.
That's what elevates programs to go from being solid and competitive to that upper category. And I think that now this is the launch, the progression for Oregon. And you mentioned the one thing that comes to mind immediately is the two positions where they've thrived is at defensive back and at defensive line. There has been a consistency over the past couple of years with the development at both of those positions, and also the caliber of either portal player or recruit that they've brought in that has then translated to them becoming top draft picks. And it's also translated them to them being successful in the field. I'm really excited to see what Amari Washington does this year. I'm excited to see how high Brandon Finney can go in a couple of years. And there are so many dudes that have been waiting in the wings, I feel like, that are also going to slowly emerge. It's very SEC-esque. The ability to retain talent that Dan Lanning, I think, needs to get recognized more for is at just an unbelievable level, especially in this current era.
So we know that Dillon Thieneman is someone that you're really excited about. I'm sure you, like myself, anticipated that there would be some other Oregon guys that you'd be talking about in the NFL draft. I mean, Mateo Uyunglele was very much somebody that came to Oregon with that three and out kind of expectation, but
Mhm.
I'm sure that he would have no problem saying that he didn't necessarily have the year that he thought he would last year. Had a lot of pressures, but a statistical drop off from the season prior. So I think with him coming back, that's obviously going to help Oregon a lot, refine his game to hopefully raise his draft stock for the 2027 NFL draft. Bear Alexander's back another year. He kind of got the ball rolling with all these big returns along the defensive line. But let's talk a little bit more about some guys that are going to be making that leap. I don't know if you want to hop over to Sadiq, or if there was anybody else that in particular caught your eye out there.
No, Sadiq is the one player who I think deserves to lead the discussion. Is just for him being mischaracterized, by the way, was hilarious at the beginning of this draft cycle as being described as like not physical, which is just so wrong. And that was the one thing coming into the season as people were doing their summer scouting and were trying to get a look at some of these upcoming prospects. And you knew that Terrence Ferguson was the player who had the most of the share of starting snaps as the tight end one. But I was fully expecting Sadiq to just be a great athlete and to have zero interest in blocking. And watching him get gritty made me realize, okay, this guy has the translation capability to being an every down tight end. I don't need a college tight end to be a technically sound blocker. It's to go in the first round. If you're a really good athlete, I just need you to show a want to. I just need to see that you want to dig your face in and you want to just grind out opposing defensive linemen, linebackers, whoever's in your path. I think that is going to go a long way for him establishing his role. A lot of times, naturally, we get so many of these great athletes that just don't translate to full-time high impact tight ends because they much rather be in space. They'd much rather be getting the ball. And the modern offenses, they're not even asked to block. So it's just hard to inspire that transformation. Brock Bowers is like not a comparison for Sadiq, but is one guy that comes to mind where he showed an intent, wasn't a great blocker technically, but showed a willingness and an intent to get physical. And I think that Sadiq has a bit of that in him as well, especially considering him being a little bit banged up this year. I wouldn't be shocked if we don't see like a huge just explosion in his first year and he ends up being like a missing piece for a team. I want to see him on the Carolina Panthers. I think that'd be the most interesting. I went on
Him and T
uh,
Mac.
seriously. I went on Jonathan Stewart's show not that long ago, and he spent a long time pitching Sadiq, and I was like, this. I mean, he needs to get somebody's ear in the front office because that would be so cool to see him in Carolina.
And Sadiq is a fun story because he came to Oregon really with that billing of being an elite athlete. Maybe not an outright freak like he is so commonly discussed as now coming out of the combine, but he wasn't someone that started right away. He had to put in his time, he had to add weight, he had to develop his skills as a blocker because he got used all over the offense coming out of high school in Idaho. And he was a Mackey Award finalist, even though he was banged up and didn't necessarily have the statistical production that I think a lot of us were expecting. I mean, now that Will Stein is over at Kentucky and taking over that program, Joe, like Oregon fans on social media, some of them, they're not all right, but they are just like eviscerating him, being like, "You said feed the studs," and Sadiq was so criminally underutilized. But I mean, he had a really strong career when all is said and done. When you look back at his time at Oregon, and Oregon's continuing to produce tight ends with Terrence Ferguson doing his thing over on the Rams. I think he had a fairly strong rookie year, and
Mhm.
then there were a lot of folks that even thought Jamari Johnson could
Yeah,
get himself drafted if he decided to come out this year.
yeah. I haven't watched Jamari Johnson closely yet, and obviously I plan to once I transition over to summer scouting once I close the book on this year's draft. But it's been kind of funny that we're literally doing this again. We're literally doing this all over again. Where Sadiq, it was funny to discuss him in the summer, and Ryan Roberts, my co-host, kind of did this as well. It's like how easy is it to evaluate a kid who didn't play a ton of snaps, and you watch the tape of Sadiq last summer, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. I see why this kid could become a first rounder, and now we're doing it again with the other tight end too. So it's funny that tight end has quietly become such a reliable, steady position for this Ducks program.
And I don't think that that's a coincidence because Drew Maringer was just promoted to offensive coordinator, and Lanning talked about just the work that he's done for the tight end position and what he's meant to that room. And there's a lot of really good talent there. We just talked about Johnson a bit, but you have Kendra Harrison coming in as one of the biggest physical and athletic freaks from the 2026 recruiting class. I don't know if you've seen much of him, but he's shattering backboards when he's playing basketball. And then now he's kind of like a man child playing tight end, going up to get some jump ball touchdown grabs. So Duck fans are super excited about him. You have Andrew Olesh, who is a former Penn State tight end that the Ducks recruited coming out of high school. So there's a lot of really good talent in that room that fans are excited about. There's one more guy that I wanted to ask you about. I don't know if, well, before we get to maybe some offensive line talk here as well, Joe,
Mhm.
I don't know if you got to see much of Bryce Betcher, but I feel like he's kind of this, I don't want to say boomer bust, but like he head to the draft with a lot of intrigue because he ultimately decided to put his, I mean, it's not even on a hold at this point. He decided to choose football over
Yeah.
baseball. He was a dual sport standout at Oregon, got drafted. I believe it was by the Houston Astros before this past season, but he chose to focus on football. And I think the linebacker position has been a fascinating one to follow at Oregon because there's been some good players there, but I don't know if fans would think universally that they've hit the mark that a lot expected under Lanning being a
Mhm.
defensive coach.
Yeah, I haven't graded Betcher yet. I've obviously watched him, and having Oregon been in the spotlight, he was just one of those dudes that just constantly was around the ball. He does come off though as one of the linebackers. And every year there's always like a day 3 guy that's just heady, he's instinctual, maybe starts out in a special teams role and then just sticks around with the team as either a plus backup who fills in, and when he fills in he's impactful and reliable, or just a solid starter that you can count on. He kind of fits that description for me. I feel as though that there's going to be an opportunity for him somewhere, especially knowing linebacker is a really interesting position to talk about, because the evaluation, we can get excited about a linebacker, but most teams, for the very vast majority, unless you're a freaky rare athlete, you're really not going to get drafted super highly. It's like running backs and safeties where teams nickel and dime that position because they realize if we go cheap at linebacker, we can spend money elsewhere, and the supporting cast can elevate the performance of our inside linebackers. So he could end up being a team's like cheap option that turns out to outperform expectations. I think that he goes into that bucket pretty. He's like right there along Aiden Fisher for me, the Indiana linebacker, who's same thing, just always around the football, productive, always did all the right things. Just you knew that you could trust him to make a play.
I'll put you on the spot here a little bit, Joe, but just knowing what you know about him, do you think he's a guy that is going to get drafted? Or, I mean, where do you kind of maybe see him as far as his value?
I would imagine so. Somewhere late. I feel like it's likely that he would get drafted just because this year's draft class overall is weak, and that's not like a negative shot at him, but it's just this class is there's a lot of day 3 guys that are going to get picked at the end of day 2 and that would normally go much later in other draft classes. I think for that reason, someone with experience and reliability is going to, I think, get valued on day 3. So it's very plausible for him to get drafted.
And he's been a tackling machine in his time at Oregon, and I think he's really been a glue guy, as the cliche goes. But he's had some pretty stellar plays during his time, so I think that he could certainly. I certainly expect him to find his way onto an NFL roster. Just
Mhm.
the path that he takes to get there is maybe the
Right.
one that is a little bit more unknown right now. So we're talking Oregon NFL draft with Joe DeLeone of the Ruffino and Joe Show and AtoZ Sports, friend of the program. Great having you on right now, Joe. Enjoying the convo. If you guys like what you're hearing here, consider subscribing to the YouTube channel and following the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, the Duck Dish Podcast, and maybe give us a read over at scoopduck.com. You can join right now for 50% off. Really great time with spring ball getting going for the Ducks. Joe, the other kind of position group that I wanted to highlight here in our draft discussion is the offensive line, because Oregon has definitely become factory might be an overstatement. I mean, some recruits have told me that they think of Oregon in that light, but they've been producing a lot of offensive linemen. They have produced one of the best offensive tackles in the NFL, in Penei Sewell, and
Mm.
they're putting out some really good talent right now under Alik Terry. But I think that the offensive line maybe didn't. I mean, not maybe they didn't hit the mark in their final two playoff games against Texas Tech and Indiana. Um, and I'm just interested to get kind of your thoughts on some of the guys that the Ducks are putting out for this year. Isaiah World and Alex Harkey. A lot of people think that Harkey may be better suited as a guard on the interior, but he was the right tackle all year. So, what do you think about those two guys, Isaiah World and Alex Harkey?
Yeah, Harkey is much further down the line for me in terms of guys that I'm going to evaluate. Admittedly, probably not a guy that gets drafted, but just because he's an offensive lineman, teams need bodies, so that might just help him. Isaiah World was super disappointing this year because I came into the season excited about the tools. He's tall, he's long, he moved really well for his body. He needed to get coached up. He was taking this leap to Oregon where you thought it would make plenty of sense that he would progress and he would grow, having previous small program jumps and progressions for guys, Johnny Cornelius being the most recent one. You thought that there would be an opportunity to tap into those traits, but man, it just didn't hit. And it felt like a lot of times, I know he got banged up, he got hurt, which really kind of impacted things and made things really difficult. But I felt like there were just so many issues across the board with consistency. Anytime that, especially the Texas Tech game was rough. That was a hard game to watch because he was getting cooked. And it was his hardest matchup he had all season, having to deal with the Texas Tech pass rushers, that defensive line.
Which was
It was
so good.
yeah, which is kind of justified, but at the same time, when you were hoping that Isaiah World was going to be at least a top 50 pick, that he would have stepped in and held his own, and he sadly didn't. I think that what is salvageable is that there's going to be a team that is going to look at him and say, you know what, he's gigantic. There are very few humans on this planet that can move like he can for his size. Let's take the swing. Let's draft him, build up his strength, get him a little bit stronger, and hope that he ends up playing to his potential. He's kind of still sitting in that developmental high potential bucket compared to him developing into that surefire top 10 pick.
And World, when he was coming out of Nevada in the transfer portal, he was billed as the number one offensive tackle in the portal, I want to say, and it was down to
It
Oregon,
was, yeah.
Nebraska, and A&M. And it's just always interesting. I mean, hindsight's 50 or 100%, 50-50. I don't know what the expression is, but like you look back at
Great
it, right?
question.
And it was viewed as this massive recruiting win. At least, I mean, that's certainly how I wrote it, because it was a huge battle, and
Yeah.
like they needed a left tackle to keep Dante Moore upright, but it just didn't all come together. I think that you can certainly say he was solid this season, but the thing is, like, when you come to a program, Oregon or anywhere, and you have the billing that he did, and things went the way they did against the truly elite competition, like, that's, you can have a
Yeah.
great season, but if you're not at your best when you're playing that elite comp, it's not gonna kind of shape out how you hope it would. So I feel like I hear everything you're saying, and it certainly makes sense. But we'll see if he lands somewhere.
Yeah, and the one thing that's kind of interesting is that, like, I had low expectations, not low, but I didn't have many expectations for Emmanuel Pregnon, and he's turned into one of
Oh,
my
I didn't
favorite
even talk about
prospects.
him. My God.
Well, but so it goes to the point. He's like so easily forgettable for whatever reason, and I feel like nobody talks about him enough. He's he's super solid. I think he's one of the highest four guys in this class, in the interior class. Someone's gonna get at the beginning of day two their starting guard for like the next at least 5 years. It's going to be one of those picks where people are going to be looking at said NFL roster wherever he goes, and they're going to be saying like, "Man, that Pregnon was such a good pick. Why wasn't why weren't more people clamoring to draft him? And he'll probably be one of these dudes that gets a huge contract as well when he enters free agency. I'm a big Pregnon fan, and I think that his role in the NFL is just very definable when the rest of the other offensive linemen just they didn't take the leap. He did. He took that slow progressive growth to becoming super steady.
Well, I definitely dropped the ball a little bit there, Joe. He should have been the first one that I talked about with regard to offensive linemen, but I also feel like, he had a tremendous season, performed well, and all the buzz has been pretty positive about him. But I know that you have to get out of here shortly for a meeting, so I don't want to hold you. Just give us a little bit about kind of what you have going on right now and what people should be on the lookout for with you and your world.
Yeah, go check out Best Pod Available over on YouTube. We just hit 700 subs. We started at the very beginning of the draft cycle, so it's been great growth with me and Ryan Roberts over at AtoZ Sports. And also, go check out Ruffino and Joe Show. We've got lots of Oregon fans that tap in every single week when we do our shows. We actually just did our Oregon preview, so go and check that out. Max, it was so great getting to catch up with you. It's always a blast getting to talk ball with you, and can't wait to talk soon.
Absolutely. Well, you guys make sure to tap in with Joe and check out everything he has going on. You can find me at Torres Sports anywhere on social media, right and over at Scoop Duck, and then here on the Duck Station podcast. Share the show, and we will catch you guys in the next one.